An 86-year-old woman walked into my courtroom owing $1,200 in parking tickets. She was blind, completely blind, and according to the city prosecutor, she'd been racking up violations for 3 straight years. The moment I saw her case file, I knew something wasn't adding up. My name is Judge Judith Schindlin, and I've been on the bench long enough to know when the system gets it catastrophically wrong. This was one of those times. Margaret Chen stood before me that Tuesday morning, one hand gripping a white cane, the other resting on her daughter's arm. The prosecutor, a young guy named David Hastings, who clearly hadn't read the file closely, started laying out the charges like he was reciting a grocery list. 47 parking violations over 36 months, unpaid meter violations, street cleaning infractions, expired registration citations. He wanted the full amount plus penalties. I held up my hand. He stopped talking. "Mr. Hastings," I said, looking directly at him, "before we proceed, I need you to tell me something. Did you actually review this case before walking into my courtroom?" He blinked. "Yes, Your Honor. The defendant has consistently ignored citations and failed to appear for previous hearings." Failed to appear. I let those words hang in the air. "Mrs. Chen, how old are you?" 86, Your Honor." Her voice was soft but steady. "And how long have you been blind?" 12 years, Your Honor. Macular degeneration." I turned back to Hastings. "She's been blind for 12 years. The ticket started 3 years ago. Does that timeline interest you at all, Counselor?" His face went slightly pale. I could see the gears turning. He hadn't connected those dots. Here's what drives me absolutely insane about bureaucracy. We create these systems, these automated processes that spit out fines and penalties, and nobody stops to ask basic questions. Nobody applies common sense. A blind 86-year-old woman accumulating parking tickets. Not one person in the entire municipal system thought that deserved a second look. "Mrs. Chen," I continued, "do you own a vehicle?" "No, Your Honor. I haven't driven in 12 years. Do you have a driver's license?" "No, Your Honor. I surrendered it when I lost my vision." Hastings was frantically flipping through his papers. "Now, I've seen this panic before. It's the moment a prosecutor realizes they've brought a deeply flawed case before a judge who doesn't tolerate nonsense." "Your Honor," he started, but I wasn't done. "Mrs. Chen's daughter, please state your name for the record." "Linda Chen, Your Honor." "Miss Chen, does your mother live with you?" "Yes, Your Honor, for the past 8 years. And the address on these citations, does it match your current residence?" Linda pulled out the tickets we'd submitted as evidence. Her hands were shaking slightly. "No, Your Honor, these are for our old address. We moved in 2015. There it was, the first crack in the city's case. I've been doing this job for 43 years. I've seen identity theft. I've seen clerical errors. I've seen fraud in every imaginable form. But this case had something else written all over it. This wasn't malice. This was incompetence colliding with automated systems. And an elderly blind woman was caught in the machinery. Mr. Hastings, who's been driving the vehicle that received these citations?" He looked down at his notes. "The citations were issued to a vehicle registered under the name Margaret Chen. That's not what I asked you. I asked who's been driving. I don't have that information, Your Honor." Of course, he didn't, because nobody had bothered to investigate. They just saw unpaid tickets, saw a name, and decided to pursue collection. $14,000 from a woman who couldn't see and didn't drive. Linda spoke up. "Your Honor, may I explain what happened?" I nodded. "When my mother moved in with me, we didn't know we needed to update the vehicle registration address for her old car. She'd already stopped driving, and we sold the car 6 months after she moved. We thought everything was handled, but apparently the new owner never properly registered the vehicle in their name. They just kept using the old plates. And there it was. The entire story in 3 sentences. Some stranger had been driving around Los Angeles in a car with Margaret Chen's old license plates, parking illegally. And every single ticket went to a blind 86-year-old woman who hadn't sat behind a wheel in over a decade. The system didn't care. The system sent notices to an address she no longer lived at. The system escalated the fines. The system eventually issued a warrant for her arrest. All automatically, all without a single human being stopping to ask whether any of this made sense. Hastings was now fully aware he'd walked into a disaster. "Your Honor, if I could request a continuance to investigate further," denied. "We're investigating right now." "Mrs. Chen, when you sold your vehicle, did you file a release of liability with the DMV?" Her face fell. "I don't know, Your Honor. My son-in-law handled the sale. He passed away 2 years ago." Linda added, Your Honor, we have the bill of sale. We can prove we sold the car, but I don't think we filed the DMV form. We didn't know we needed to. This is where most judges would get angry at the defendant for not following proper procedure. But I'm not most judges. Yes, they should have filed the release of liability. Yes, that was their responsibility. But I also understand that an elderly woman dealing with vision loss and a family helping her transition into their home might not know every bureaucratic requirement. The question wasn't whether they'd made a mistake. The question was whether the punishment fit the crime. $14,000 for tickets someone else accumulated for violations at an address she didn't live at. For a car she didn't own anymore against a woman who couldn't see. I looked at Hastings. The city is pursuing $14,200 from a blind octogenarian for tickets she physically could not have incurred. Do I have that right, Your Honor? The law requires. I know what the law requires, Counselor. I'm asking if you think this is justice. He didn't answer. Smart move. What happened next would determine whether Margaret Chen spent her final years buried under impossible debt or whether common sense would prevail. I looked at Margaret Chen sitting there, hands folded in her lap, and I made a decision. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? Yes, Your Honor. Between the date you stopped driving and the date you sold your vehicle, did you receive any parking tickets? No, Your Honor. I never got a single ticket in 50 years of driving. I turned back to the DMV records on my screen. Mr. Hastings, I'm looking at the violation dates. The first ticket was issued 7 months after Mrs. Chen's ophthalmologist certified her as legally blind. Does that timing concern you at all? Hastings shuffled his papers. Your Honor, the city has no record because nobody looked. But I'm looking right now. I pulled up the ticket details. The first violation was on Melrose Avenue at 2 in the morning. Mrs. Chen, were you frequenting Melrose Avenue nightclubs at 85 years old? A small smile crossed her face despite the stress. No, Your Honor, I was in bed by 9/9. The second ticket was in Venice Beach, the third in Hollywood, the fourth in Koreatown at midnight. I looked directly at Hastings. Does this pattern suggest an elderly woman running errands, or does it suggest someone else entirely? His silence was answer enough. Linda raised her hand slightly. Your Honor, may I show you something? Go ahead. She pulled out her phone and opened her photos. This is my mother's daily schedule. She has home care Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. She has physical therapy on Tuesdays. She goes to my daughter's house for dinner every Sunday. We document everything because of her medical conditions. She showed me the screen on the dates of these tickets. I can prove where she was. She wasn't anywhere near these locations. I examined the photos, timestamps, locations, even some with Margaret clearly visible in the background. This family had been meticulous, probably because they knew how vulnerable she was. Your Honor, Hastings interjected, even if Mrs. Chen wasn't the driver, the vehicle was registered in her name. She's legally responsible. Normally, yes. But let me ask you something. If someone steals your identity and racks up credit card debt, should you be forced to pay it? That's different, is it? Someone was using her vehicle registration without her knowledge or consent. She reported the sale. She's provided proof of that sale. The only thing she failed to do was file one specific DMV form. And for that administrative oversight, you want to financially destroy her. Hastings knew he was losing ground. The city has invested significant resources in collection efforts because nobody bothered to investigate before pursuing collection. That's not Mrs. Chen's fault. That's your fault. I could see him calculating his next move. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Everyone was waiting to see what I would do. Here's what most people don't understand about being a judge. Yes, I'm bound by law. Yes, I have to follow procedure. But the law also gives me discretion. It gives me the ability to look at the totality of circumstances and make decisions that serve justice, not just bureaucracy. And this was not justice. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice carrying absolute authority. Mr. Hastings, you're going to go back to the city attorney's office, and you're going to recommend that every single ticket issued after Mrs. Chen's sale date be dismissed, not reduced, dismissed entirely. Your Honor, I don't have authority to then find someone who does, because if you force me to make this ruling from the bench, I'm going to do it in a way that generates publicity. I'm going to make this a story about how Los Angeles pursued a blind 86-year-old woman for $14,000 in tickets she couldn't possibly have incurred. Is that the story the city wants told? His face went pale. Bad publicity was the one thing city attorneys feared more than losing cases. Furthermore, I continued, I'm ordering the DMV to investigate who actually registered this vehicle after the sale. Someone's been driving around with invalid plates, accumulating violations, and they need to be held accountable. Mrs. Chen shouldn't be paying for someone else's fraud. Linda was crying now, relief washing over her face. Margaret sat perfectly still, processing what was happening. Your Honor, Hastings tried one more time. What about the tickets issued before the sale date? I looked at the records. There are 3 tickets from before she sold the car. Total value, $450. Mrs. Chen, did you drive at all during the month before you sold the vehicle? No, Your Honor. My daughter drove me everywhere by then. Linda, were you driving your mother's car? Sometimes, yes, when I took her to appointments. Then those 3 tickets might be legitimate. Here's my ruling. Mrs. Chen will pay $225, half the total, as a good faith settlement for possible violations that occurred while the vehicle was still in her possession. The city will dismiss the remaining $14,000 immediately. Hastings looked like he wanted to argue, but he knew better. Do we have an agreement, Counselor? He hesitated for just a moment. I'll need to consult with you until end of business today to accept this resolution. If I don't hear from the city attorney's office by 5 p.m., I'm dismissing everything and filing a formal complaint about prosecutorial overreach. Your choice. That got his attention. Yes, Your Honor, I'll make the call. Good. This case has continued for 30 days, pending the city's response. Mrs. Chen, you're free to go. Margaret stood slowly, Linda supporting her arm. But before they could leave, something happened that I'll never forget. Margaret turned to face the courtroom gallery. There were maybe 15 people scattered across the benches. Most were waiting for their own cases. A few were law students observing. She didn't know any of them, but she looked at each person directly, her clouded eyes moving from face to face, and she spoke. Thank you for being witnesses to what justice looks like. Her voice was soft but clear, the kind of voice that had probably read bedtime stories to children and grandchildren, the kind of voice that had comforted scared patients in hospital rooms during overnight shifts. Then she did something that absolutely destroyed me. She bowed. This 86-year-old woman who had been dragged through bureaucratic hell for months, who had feared losing everything because of tickets she didn't deserve, bowed to the courtroom in gratitude. I had to look away for a second. 43 years on the bench, and I still wasn't prepared for moments like that. Linda guided her mother toward the exit, but Margaret stopped at the prosecutor's table. Hastings was gathering his files, probably already on his phone, texting his supervisor about the disaster he'd just experienced. Young man, Margaret said. He looked up, clearly uncomfortable. I hope you have a good day. I hope you go home to people who love you. And I hope next time you'll remember that the people in these files are real. She said it without anger, without bitterness, just gentle correction from someone who'd lived long enough to know better. Hastings opened his mouth, but nothing came out. What could he possibly say? After they left, I called a 15-minute recess. I needed to compose myself. My clerk brought me water. Officer Thompson, my bailiff, stuck his head in. Judge, that was something. That woman has more grace than most people, twice her size. You think the city will actually dismiss those tickets? They will, because if they don't, I'm calling every news station in Los Angeles. Channel 4 loves stories about bureaucracy gone wrong. He grinned. Remind me never to get on your bad side. 3 hours later, my phone rang. It was the city attorney himself, not Hastings. They were accepting my resolution. All tickets after the sale date dismissed. Mrs. Chen would pay $225, and they'd investigate the registration fraud. I'd won. More importantly, Margaret Chen had won. But here's what happened next that made this case truly unforgettable. 2 weeks later, I received a letter at the courthouse. The return address was Margaret's. Inside was a handwritten note on flowered stationery. Her penmanship was shaky but legible. Dear Judge, I wanted you to know that the DMV found the person who'd been using my old license plates. It was a young man who bought the car from the dealer. He didn't register it properly because he had outstanding warrants. He's been arrested. The police said he was involved in other crimes too. Because you pushed for the investigation, they caught him. I don't know if you realize it, but you might have saved someone from being hurt by this man. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a case number. With gratitude, Margaret Chen, I sat in my chambers holding that letter for a long time. She was thanking me. This woman who'd been put through absolute hell was thanking me for doing what should have been done from the beginning. That's when I made a decision. I called the court administrator and requested a meeting with the presiding judge. I wanted to propose a new protocol. Every case involving defendants over 75 would get additional scrutiny. Every case where the defendant claimed identity theft or registration fraud would trigger automatic investigation before collection proceedings. You're asking for a lot of extra work. The administrator said, I'm asking us to do our jobs correctly. How many other Margaret Chen are out there right now terrified they'll lose everything because we didn't bother to ask basic questions? The protocol was implemented 3 months later. We called it the Chen review process, though Margaret never knew it was named after her. In the first year alone, we identified 47 cases where defendants were being pursued for violations they didn't commit. 47 people who would have been crushed by the system if someone hadn't stopped to actually look. Margaret came back to court exactly 30 days later for the follow-up hearing. The city had formally dismissed everything except the agreed-upon amount. She paid her $225. Linda helped her write the check. Before she left, I did something I rarely do. I came down from the bench and shook her hand. Mrs. Chen, you handled yourself with remarkable dignity throughout this process. I'm sorry you had to go through it at all. Judge, I'm 86 years old. I've been through worse, but I'll remember your kindness for whatever time I have left. I'll remember your grace for the rest of my career. She smiled. I brought you something. From her purse, she pulled out a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was a hand-knitted bookmark cream colored with delicate blue flowers. I made it myself. Took me 3 weeks because my hands shake now, but I wanted you to have something to remember that justice still matters. I still have that bookmark. It sits in my desk drawer. Sometimes when I'm dealing with a particularly frustrating case, when bureaucracy seems to be winning over common sense, I take it out and remember Margaret Chen. Remember that behind every case number is a human being, someone with a story, someone who deserves to be heard. That's the job, not just applying rules, not just moving files from one stack to another, actually seeing people. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about the case. 3 weeks after Margaret's final hearing, I received a phone call that made me question everything I thought I understood about her case. Judge, this is Detective Sarah Morrison from the Fraud Division. We need to talk about Margaret Chen. My stomach dropped. Had I missed something? Was there more to her story? What about her? The man we arrested, David Torres, he's talking, and what he's saying, you need to hear this. I met Detective Morrison in my chambers that afternoon. She brought a file thick enough to use as a doorstop. Torres ran an identity theft ring targeting elderly Asian immigrants specifically. He had a system. He'd get access to DMV records through a corrupt employee, find people over 75 who still had valid licenses, then create fake registrations using their information. How many victims? We've identified 237 so far. But here's the part that's going to make you angry. Margaret Chen wasn't randomly selected. She pulled out a photograph. Torres, standing outside Margaret's building. He lived 2 floors above her. He knew she rarely drove. He knew she'd be an easy target because she kept to herself. He specifically chose his neighbors. The calculation of it made me sick. This wasn't some faceless crime. He'd looked Margaret in the eye in the elevator, probably held the door for her, then went home and stole her identity. There's more. Torres kept records, detailed records of every ticket, every violation, every fee. He was tracking how much money the city was collecting from his victims. Judge, he made over $40,000 selling fake registrations. The city's collected nearly $250,000 in fines and fees from his victims. I sat back in my chair, $4 million from elderly people who didn't commit any violations. Most of them paid without fighting. They were scared. They didn't understand the system. Margaret Chen was one of the only ones who actually came to court. Detective Morrison slid another document across my desk. This is a list of all his victims who had cases in traffic court, 43 people. Most of them paid everything the city demanded. A few tried to fight but gave up when it got too complicated. Margaret was the only one who kept pushing until someone listened. I looked at the names: 82-year-old Vietnamese woman, 79-year-old Chinese man, 90-year-old Korean woman, all of them with paid in full stamps on their records. Does the city know about this? They do now. The district attorney is trying to figure out how to handle the restitution. But there's a problem. Most of these people paid years ago. Some have died. The city's position is that the payments were made in good faith based on valid citations at the time. Valid citations for violations they didn't commit. Technically, the violations occurred. The vehicles were registered fraudulently and driven illegally. The city's argument is that the registered owner is responsible regardless of who actually committed the violation. I felt rage building in my chest. The same system that almost crushed Margaret was now hiding behind technicalities to avoid making things right for people just like her. That's obscene. I agree, but that's why I'm here. The DA wants to know if you'd be willing to testify about Margaret's case. Show how the system failed. Make it harder for them to justify keeping money they collected from fraud victims. I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. The hearing took place 6 weeks later. I sat in a different courtroom this time as a witness instead of a judge. I explained how Margaret's case came to me, how she nearly lost everything, how the system was designed to process people, not protect them. And if she hadn't been persistent, the prosecutor asked, she would have been evicted. She would have lost her home because the city refused to investigate obvious red flags. The city's attorney objected, called my testimony inflammatory, said I was overstepping my role. The judge, someone I'd known for 20 years, overruled him. Judge Chen makes a valid point. Continue. In the end, the city agreed to a settlement. Every victim of Torres's scheme who'd paid fines would receive full restitution plus interest. The total came to $283,000. But more importantly, the case triggered a state investigation into how traffic courts handle elderly defendants. New protections were implemented, mandatory fraud checks for anyone over 75, automatic legal assistance for non-English speakers, real consequences for cities that ignored obvious warning signs. I called Margaret to tell her the news. Mrs. Chen, because you fought back, 236 other people are getting their money back because you didn't give up. The system changed. She was quiet for a long moment. I just didn't want to lose my home. I know, but you did something bigger than that. You exposed a broken system and forced it to fix itself. Will they really change, Judge? Or will they just go back to the old ways when people stop paying attention? It was the most cynical thing I'd ever heard her say, and she was probably right to be skeptical. I don't know. But I promise you this. Every time I see a case like yours, I'll remember what almost happened. I'll ask the questions that need asking. I'll make sure at least one courtroom does better. Then it was worth it. Margaret Chen died 2 years later. Natural causes, peacefully in the home she fought so hard to keep. Her daughter called to let me know. I still have that bookmark she made me. And every single day before I take the bench, I look at it and remember what this job is actually supposed to be about. Not processing cases, protecting people. Margaret Chen showed me something I should have known all along. The system isn't broken by accident. It's broken by design, built to process people efficiently rather than protect them justly. But when one person refuses to be processed, when one blind 86-year-old woman stands up and demands to be seen as human, everything changes. That bookmark sits in my desk as a reminder that justice isn't about following procedures. It's about asking one simple question. Does this make sense? And if the answer is no, having the courage to do something about